This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program News Analysis, now we bring you a discussion on sale of Chinese nuclear reactor to Pakistan. The participants are Commodore Uday Bhaskar, strategic analyst, and Jyoti Malhotra, senior journalist.
Commodore Bhaskar, can you tell us about the significance of these reports that China and Pakistan are signing some sort of commercial loans for China to build 2 civil nuclear power plants off Karachi in Pakistan?
China has been a very staunch supporter of Pakistan's nuclear profile, and this is something that has caused concern both in India and in the global community for 2 reasons. One is Pakistan has a track record as a proliferator, and this relates to the whole A.Q. Khan episode.
When they sold plans or when they bought plans secretly and they sold...
Pakistan in that particular case was also described as being the equivalent of a nuclear Walmart. If you remember when General Musharraf was in power, this had hit the headlines. So one is Pakistan's own track record as a proliferator. The second is that Pakistan is also a country that is now associated with terrorism. And the reason for both the concern in the global community and in India is the fact that Pakistan is now ratcheting up the equivalent of its nuclear material, particularly fissile material. And this is a country that does not have any separation as far as its civil and military program is concerned.
But before you get to that, Commodore Bhaskar, just explain to our listeners, please, for example, in 2008 when India and the US went and signed a civil nuclear deal, then called the 123 agreement. Now, the world was really pretty much divided on this deal, whether India should be allowed into the nuclear suppliers group, which is this, I guess, the sanctum sanctorum, if you like, of powers that have this kind of nuclear facilities. So why is it such a big deal that Pakistan and China have the same relationship?
No, the big deal really is that when India was accorded this exceptional status, as they call it, this happened in 2008, the global community, represented by the NSG, yes, they had very intense deliberations within the NSG,
which is the Nuclear
Suppliers Group, but finally they took a decision, it was at US behest, that India would be admitted into the NSG and would be accorded what is called as an exceptional status, meaning the exceptional status is because India has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
But neither has Pakistan.
Neither has Pakistan. India also has nuclear weapons, so does Pakistan.
Right.
The reason why India was given this status, and this was in a way I think expressed very well by a US Congressman, Gary Ackerman, when he said that if Pakistan wants to be treated like India, let it have a non-proliferation record like India for the last 30 plus years. So India's USP, unique selling product if you will, is that India's track record is unblemished as far as proliferation, meaning that we have been very, shall we say, our commitment to non-proliferation has been exceptionally high. In Pakistan's case, since we are talking about China and these 2 reactors which are now called Kanuk 2 and 3 of Karachi, the concern expressed in the Nuclear Suppliers Group and by countries like India is that China is acting in a manner that would be defiant of the NSG's norms. Now Beijing is trying to take recourse to what they call as the grandfather clause, saying that they had entered into a deal with Pakistan for providing other reactors, for instance in Chashma, which is in the Pakistan Punjab. This was before China had joined the Nuclear Suppliers Group in 2004. Now, for any professional who's following this subject closely, it's clear that China is acting in a manner that would be at variance with the consensus that prevails in the NSG. So the immediate news that has now hit the headlines again is the fact that this deal is now moving forward, because it came into public domain, I would say, early this year in April, when there was talk about additional reactors in Karachi. Now, Chashma is the original place where China had...
In Pakistan, Punjab.
In Pakistan, Punjab, where they had Chashma 1 and 2. And they were talking about Chashma 3 and 4. And now there is Kanuk, that is Karachi 2 and 3.
Okay.
So this gives Pakistan, on the whole, a nuclear profile that is quite, you might say, substantial. And secondly, Pakistan has also been playing the equivalent of a spoiler's role in the FMCT, which is the Fissile Material Cut-Off Treaty negotiations going on in Geneva. So all these add to the global concern about where is China going with Pakistan.
But explain to us, Commodore Bhaskar, why should we be concerned if you told us how this sort of adds to Pakistan's nuclear profile? But it seems to me that even if China is, if I'm playing devil's advocate and I would ask you that even if China were to grandfather these 2 nuclear power plants off Karachi and build them for Pakistan, because I doubt Pakistan has the money to buy them off the Chinese, but in the light of the very, very close and all-weather, very special and unique relationship between Pakistan and the Chinese, I'm sure the Chinese will build this for the Pakistanis. Now, first of all, explain why do you think India should be worried? If these are civil nuclear power plants, which means just like the power plants that Russia is building for India in South India, in Kudamkulam and Tamil Nadu, which are also civil nuclear power plants, and hopefully the Americans and the French will also build civil nuclear power plants in India. Why should India be concerned that China is building these civil nuclear power plants? And also if you could connect this, if possible, with the PM's visit to China in a few days.
I think India's concern is about the fact that China has supported Pakistan in its nuclear endeavor in an unprecedented manner, meaning that China had provided Pakistan with a nuclear weapon. This goes back to late 80s, May 1990 is the date that is often ascribed to Pakistan having acquired a covert nuclear weapon capability, and this was provided by China. So India's concern really is that China is arming India's neighbor in a manner that gives it the equivalent of a WMD, that is weapons of mass destruction capability, thereby placing India at a very great disadvantage. Now there are certain nuclear norms that all the major nuclear powers had adopted.
So why is China doing this?
Exactly. So that is the reason for India's concern, which was first voiced, as I said, in the early 90s when China had provided Pakistan this kind of a support. And we know from our experience that when Pakistan acquired its covert nuclear capability, it in a way stepped up its activity of terror against India. If you recall May of 1990, what was happening in Jammu and Kashmir? Yes, there were certain reasons for the internal dissatisfaction within Jammu and Kashmir also at that time. We accept that.
The Soviet Union was on the verge of breaking up.
In the following year, we know that the Soviet Union imploded. It was also the end of the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, the blowback.
And the Cold War.
But the real reason India's concern was that the terror issue, wherein Pakistan had consciously adopted terror as a strategy against India.
The proxy war.
And they used the nuclear weapon as a firewall, meaning that they were blunting India's ability to counter this with any conventional response. That got aggravated as we went through that particular decade, and India tried, when Prime Minister Rao was at the helm, to draw China's attention and to say that this is not the kind of quote-unquote responsible behavior that we associate with a neighbor like China. But to date, China refuses to accept that they have even engaged in any such activity. So this is one of those big challenges for Indian diplomacy.
And then in 1998, of course, Pakistan goes nuclear. After India goes nuclear, the Pakistanis go nuclear. So are you also saying that Pakistan's nuclear tests took place with significant Chinese help?
Short answer, yes. Pakistan's nuclear weapon capability was enabled by China in considerable measure.
So they have the nuclear weapons. They have, you've already said in 1990 about the Chinese they gave them a nuclear weapon. And you're also saying that the Chinese gave them missiles. So basically, China is arming Pakistan to the teeth. And Pakistan is, of course, as you say, a neighbor, but also a hostile neighbor of India.
I mean, a neighbor that for the Pakistani military has a certain orientation vis-a-vis India that has not been conducive to peace and stability.
Okay, now bring us into the present day and tell us about the PM is going to Beijing. First, the Prime Minister goes to Moscow in the coming week, and then he goes to Beijing from there. So how do you place this whole thing in context?
Well, I think the nuclear issue and its linkage to terrorism, to my mind, is really the most significant challenge to the entire southern Asian region. This is a challenge to India. It's a challenge to China. China has its own anxiety about terror, and so does Russia. We are all concerned that post-2014, this region is going to become far more turbulent.
This is when the Americans
withdraw from Afghanistan.
Okay.
So I think for the Prime Minister, both in Moscow and in Beijing, when regional security is being reviewed, current developments would definitely identify terrorism and the post-2014 scenarios when the Americans and the Western troops leave. Secondly, what is the status of the WMD, or the Weapons of Mass Destruction, the Nuclear Stability Index? And at the moment, I would say that it is moving to higher levels of instability, largely engendered by Pakistan and its military. And this is the concern that India and the other countries have, why China's behavior has also come up for critical comment in the NSG, in the Nuclear Suppliers Group.
Commodore Bhaskar, you said something very interesting a minute ago, where you said the Chinese are also concerned about insurgency and terrorism, especially on their western borders, which in Xinjiang province, which border Afghanistan and Pakistan in that whole region. Now, if they are concerned about Uyghur terrorism, which is trained in Pakistan in the extremist training camps of Pakistan, and those men are then sent back into China, why would then China be arming Pakistan to its teeth?
Well, Pakistan seems to have assured the Chinese that they would not allow any activity of terrorism that is directed against China in Pakistani soil, meaning that when we talk about Pakistan and China and the Xinjiang province, the Uyghurs and Uzbek groups that promote this ideology, they are not being given any support in Pakistan. This is an assurance Pakistan has given China. And they seem to think that they can make this distinction between terror groups and support some and eliminate or control the others. Clearly, they have not had much success with their Pakistan Taliban. So my own reading is that Pakistan has a serious internal challenge. But the larger issue really is about stability in Asia and how China orients or positions itself. And I think this is a very big political challenge, because China's opening gambit is that we don't acknowledge this, that we are not supporting Pakistan in terms of the weapon program. Our support is only for civilian nuclear power, which is motherhood and apple pie.
No, but if they're building these nuclear power plants for Pakistan, it is a violation of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, which is an international body.
The norms of the NSG,
it is a
because it
violation
operates
of that.
by consensus.
In that case, how China likely to get away with the violation of this group, of which it is a member, first of all? And if China is now trying to become world power number one, especially in the wake of the Americans sort of downsizing a little bit because of their own shutdown and their other economic problems, how does China look at itself?
Well, I think this is really, a replay of China in the South China Sea, meaning that there was the equivalent of a code of conduct. But yet, China has interpreted both its claim as also the manner in which this issue is going to be addressed in terms of Chinese preference. So there is a Chinese way of dealing with the South China Sea, which will be bilateral, and each of you will have to accept the way we interpret the claim. This seems to be the Chinese position in the South China Sea. It's caused a lot of dismay, and it's not very clear as to how the Americans, who are the other major power in the region, many of those countries are also allies of the United
States. Smaller nations in the South China
Sea and also Japan. So it's a bit unclear now how the Americans or the United States is going to position itself on, say, the South China Sea. China's point is that this is bilateral, you stay out of it. This is what they're telling Washington. President Obama has his own problems in the United States. So even in the NSG, going back to April of this year, when Kanup 2 and 3 were first talked about or came into the public domain, the United States has been very reticent, because China has a very valuable role to play in the UN Security Council apropos Iran. Pakistan is very critical for the US withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan in the run-up to 2014. So there is a lot of what you might call as both hedging, and some deals are being perhaps quietly arrived at. But this should not in any way, I would say, dilute the fact that China needs to assuage and convince neighbors like India that it is indeed a responsible power. Absent concrete action by Beijing, I think Prime Minister Manmohan Singh would be well within his political space to raise these issues with China, because the more we do not acknowledge them, the more they fester.
Commodore Uday Bhaskar, thank you so much for talking to us.
You were listening to a discussion on sale of Chinese nuclear reactor to Pakistan. The participants were Commodore Uday Bhaskar, strategic analyst, and Jyoti Malhotra, senior journalist. It came to you in the program News Analysis, produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.